Hey there, it's Brittany. We are now going to be reading part 4 of I found my old copy of my favorite childhood movie, Something Seriously Wrong with It. And I had assumed for some reason that this was a 7-part story, but it's actually a 9-part story, so we have several others to catch up with. So, if you haven't listened to the first 3 parts, I will put it down in the description below where you can start from the beginning. But for now, let's begin. I will say there's a small little recap at the beginning, and then we actually start with part 4. I love animated movies, particularly non-Disney features. Don Bluth films like Rockadoodle, The Secret of Nim, and especially All Dogs Go to Heaven are far better than Beauty and the Beast ever was. This helps at my job as an in-home support for disabled adults. My favorite client, Caroline, has the exact same taste in movies, which helped us bond quickly. As a ward of the state, Caroline has no money. After noticing that all her tapes were in terrible condition, my coworker Jessie and I hatched a plan to replace them. Caroline won't use DVDs, so Jessie and I trawled everywhere for good tapes. The only one we couldn't find was All Dogs Go to Heaven. Fortunately, it's my favorite childhood movie, so I had my own well-preserved copy. To ensure all the movies were in good condition, Jessie and I scheduled weekly movie nights together. The last tape we watched was mine, All Dogs Go to Heaven. We fell asleep halfway through it. Him because he was legitimately exhausted. Me because I'm a sympathetic sleeper. When I woke, the tape was still playing. It was a cartoon in that familiar, dreamy animation style, but instead of the kids' movie, it showed horrific abuse that had been perpetuated against Caroline as a child. I freaked out and turned it off before Jessie woke up. Afterward, I kept watching to see if I'd been dreaming. Instead of easing my mind, I watched a horrifying animated sequence about Jessie's childhood. These beautifully rendered, artistic vignettes of the most horrifying abuse imaginable overtook my dreams. Every time I sleep, I dream them. It's horrifically galvanizing, watching monsters hurt the people you love. In a way, these cartoons are worse than real life. The contrast between the breathtaking animation and the sickening subject matter is maddening. It's not just the dreams. There's some kind of wraith attached to it, a phantom. It helped me kill Caroline's abuser. It's hard to explain and fundamentally absurd, but there it is. With Caroline's abuser gone, I set my sights on Jessie's tormentor. According to the Phantom, the man's name is Earl Koenig. Caroline was uncharacteristically tired yesterday. I used the spare time to look up Earl Koenig. No hits beyond a jazz musician in a fairy tale. So, after ensuring he was busy building models with Mark, I looked up Jessie. His last name is Koenig, so I assumed Earl was his father, uncle, or grandfather. But that wasn't the case. Jessie's mother, Anna Koenig, went missing when she was 16 and Jessie was 2. Her disappearance made the news. The article is still archived online and mentioned that Jessie's biological father, Anna's former foster parent, had been sentenced to 25 years for abusing numerous children. Anna herself was an orphan with no living relatives. After that, no mention of Jessie until his high school graduation announcement, dated 4 years ago. Nothing after. Like I said, Jessie and I work for a nonprofit that provides housing and in-home care for disabled adults. We work in the same house. The last few days have been difficult. He's had these dreams long before I did. When I started having them, he stopped, and he blames himself. I don't blame him. But it was impossible to reassure him while working because our other client, Mark, freaks out whenever he sees us talking. Jessie usually works doubles. He's one of the 4 male staff in an organization with a client base that is 70% male. But he's been training a new hire the past couple of weeks, and lo and behold, the new guy's permanent assignment is the swing shift at Mark and Caroline's house. So, for maybe the 4th time since I started the job, Jesse and I got off work at the same time. He looked exhausted, which surprised me. With the dreams gone, he should have been sleeping better. Instead, he looked half dead. "Are you looking forward to some time off for once?" I asked. He shook his head. "He's not going to last, I can already tell. Hopefully he quits fast. It'd be less disruptive for Mark." "That sucks," I said mildly. "Not really. I hate being home." He seemed to regret his words instantly. "That sounds dramatic. I'd rather be doing something that means something, and I don't do well alone. It's part of why this job works so well." I could tell by his body language that he was lying. I wondered what he was hiding, if he'd ever tell me or ever want to. He looked directly at me for the first time in hours, with an overwhelming sadness that made me feel like I'd been punched. "Take care. If you need anything, call." It felt wrong to let him go and suffer alone yet again. "Why don't you hang out with me today? Minimize your meaningless downtime." He tried to smile, but his face crumpled. "I've done enough to you. You don't have to take care of me." But he stood there, waiting for me to answer. I don't know if it was right. I don't feel the way he does, although I easily could. He suffered unimaginably his entire life and still came out as a good man. Even now, with freedom from a literal curse, he has no peace because misplaced guilt is eating him alive. So I said, "Please come home with me." He did. When he undressed, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to go through with it. Long, pitted scars wrapped around his chest and back. Seeing them made me want to cry. He looked uncertain, almost afraid, and it took everything I had to keep calm at first. Afterward, we drifted off together as a late afternoon waned into evening. The dying light bled into a painted dream I couldn't remember. I woke up crying. The dream was already fading, leaving vague impressions. Warm light, soft darkness, a withered bundle in a shallow pit, and a boy, of course. A familiar dark-haired boy weeping as an indescribable darkness crept toward him. Jesse was fast asleep. He looked better. At the very least, that flat pallor had warmed somewhat. Electric dread crept through my body as I struggled to remember the dream. I couldn't hold still. Rather than wake Jesse, I got out of bed and went to the living room. The TV was on, showing nothing but flickering static. Propped against the screen was a tape. I haven't put the VHS player away, but I think it would have been there even if I had. I hesitated. I wanted to watch it. Wanted to see the dream I'd forgotten. But what if Jesse woke up? This happens when you can't remember. Though expected, that slithering hiss made me shudder. Be careful. Dreams make far clearer paths. I can't watch this, I said. You need to make your path now. You won't have time before you sleep again. I obeyed, not from fear but from excitement. I wanted to see what was next, wanted to reignite the fury that had waned these past several hours, but mostly, I wanted to take care of Jesse, to take away whatever was still tormenting him, partly to help him and partly to hear the third name, whatever it was. I put the tape in the player. A mad, chaotically brief tangle of bright colors and figures gave way to black. Then came a stylized title card. The Boy Who Was Too Good to Do Any Good. Chapter 1. Blackness, cut to the rich, overwhelming color of an animated film. Deep tangerine twilight suffused a small grove. Gnats flitted about, sparkling like tiny golden stars. A bat swooped down, ruffling the hair of a very small boy. Jesse. 4 or 5 at the most. Enormous dark eyes sparkled with tears. Dull tear tracks streaked his face. He was tied between 2 trees, directly in front of a shallow pit. Raw red welts covered his body. Droplets of blood bloomed from the wounds and dripped onto the wildflowers beneath. In the pit lay a desiccated, dismembered body with a bashed-in head. Discolored skin wrapped the limbs like old paper. Long black hair straggled from the scalp, glimmering in the waning sun. The light softened, creating a red-orange watercolor haze that gave way to blue evening. Jesse's lip quivered. More tears rolled down his face, fat droplets twinkling like diamonds. A dark figure coalesced in the twilight, a tall, brawny man with thick black hair and a face obscured by shadows. He stopped several feet behind Jesse and waited as the night deepened. Stars blinked to life overhead in a night sky, swirled with a dozen shades of blue and purple. Crickets began to sing. Jesse wept as his wounds dripped, watering the ground with tears and blood. The last pale hint of daylight on the horizon finally faded, giving way to full night. Suddenly, with a dry rattle, the bones in the pit shuddered. The skull rolled, jaw yawning open. Jesse flailed, but the rope held him securely in place. A shadow gathered at the other end of the grove, growing among painted pines and rustling grass. Darkness beyond darkness grew and stretched into a black figure. It glided silently to the pit. Overhead, stars winked out, and the deliriously lovely night sky faded to black. That awful shadow reared up, spreading above the trees as if reaching for the missing stars. A faceless giant with massive, cruel horns peered over the trees. The bones clacked and juddered. They knit themselves together in unnatural waves, leaving vital pieces behind. Dry black hair swung around its mummified face. Jaws continued to stretch and click, tearing the delicate flesh of its cheeks. The shadow came into the grove and halted before the pit. The faceless man stood. Grass rustled under his feet as he strode to Jesse with a knife. He pierced the nape of Jesse's neck and sliced down, sending a dark spray of blood into the air. Jesse shrieked and thrashed. The man cut his bonds and threw him into the pit. Then he knelt at the edge and watched. The corpse crawled to Jesse, stopping inches short of his cheek. Empty sockets radiated darkness, then pressed its lipless mouth to his forehead, then drew back and picked up a leftover limb. A cruel, broken point of bone glinted in the moonlight. It crossed the pit and jabbed the bone upward, not towards the shadow, but to the faceless man. Jesse watched in horror. Moonlit skin and bright eyes imbued him with a dreamy inner light at stark odds with the dull, withered corpse. It kept jabbing the limb at the man, sharp point dancing a mere foot from his face. The faceless man ignored it, looking across at the horned shadow. Jesse. His deep, atonal voice was a bare register short of a croak. Listen to me. Pick her up and take her to it. No! The man leaned forward, dirt crumpling under his large hands. Even without a face, his anger, his hatred was palpable. Give her over. Jesse began to hyperventilate, eyes flicking between the faceless man and the poor corpse weakly brandishing its own detached leg. He stared at it with haunted, horrified eyes, then looked up. Now. Jesse grabbed the bone and stabbed the man's eye. It was suddenly visible in the impenetrable shadows of its face, a burning, cloudy yellow. He roared and pulled it out. Blood gushed from the socket. The horned shadow spilled into the pit, sliding over the corpse and pulling it back. Jesse immediately latched onto those withered hands, struggling to drag the poor creature back. It desperately dug its fingers into Jesse's arms. For a moment, it looked like they might win. Then, the shadow gave a great heave. The corpse's hands convulsed, scoring Jesse's skin from elbow to palm as it disappeared into the shadow. The darkness receded like a silent tide. The forest and stars slowly returned in its wake. The faceless man screamed furiously and leapt into the pit. He beat Jesse viciously with the limb, laying wound upon wound over the raw welts. Jesse quickly lost consciousness. When he stopped moving, the man dropped the bone, hauled himself out of the pit, and walked away, fading into myriad shades of blue and purple darkness. The film cut to black. "You have painted dreams about me?" Jesse's broken voice shattered the silence. He stood in the doorway, eyes wide and dark. Then he backed away. I followed him, repeating mindless apologies. He shrugged into his clothes without another word. I tentatively touched his arm. He pulled me in briefly, as if for a hug, but quickly moved away. I begged him to stay, but he wouldn't have it. "I can't." He reached for his car keys off the nightstand. "I'm never going to get away from this. I've done enough to you. Don't do anything for me. I can't." His voice broke. "I can't." I sat in the darkness for a while before the static phantom flickered into being. "I need you to sleep now." It moved forward until we were face to face and slid its hands around my face. Sharp electric static stung my cheeks. "Be angry. I will do the rest." I wasn't tired, but I didn't care. "Is that faceless fucker Earl Koenig?" "It is." I surrendered easily. Rage consumed me as thoroughly as that alien darkness had consumed the forest. Soon I sat limp on the carpet while the static specter pulled wet, gleaming ropes from my head. Ropes covered in moving pictures of Jesse's horrific upbringing. The pile of cord shimmered like intestines. It shifted suddenly, snaking across the room. It tapped the carpet experimentally, then plunged through the floor as if through water. "What is it doing?" I asked. "If you make a large tunnel, he will follow you. A small tunnel keeps him at bay." "But I'm going to kill him," I said. The rope burrow widened into a perfect round hole. I peered in and shivered. The other end was light, the size of a dime. The specter looped the shimmering rope around its hands and sat at the edge. It looked absurdly like a fisherman at an ice hole. I hesitated. The bottom of the tunnel looked so far away, but that didn't matter. This was a dream, and even if it wasn't, I was too angry to care. That anger propelled me. I grabbed the rope and descended. The tunnel functioned as a massive cylindrical screen, silently replaying every painted nightmare I'd had of Jesse, and several I hadn't. Some I could have never imagined. Stag-headed monsters and men like Caroline's sadistic clown. Blood and beatings. Dismembered children and skinned bodies writhing weakly under a burning sun. Some of it made me sick. Mostly, though, it stoked that endless, consuming rage. This wasn't just for Jesse. This was for dozens of victims, people who were gone, people I would never know, people who had no one to fight for them, no one to remember. I reached the end of the tunnel. The rope dangled several feet above a neat cartoon carpet. I let go and dropped into the middle of a dreamily animated apartment. Lamplight cast soft yellow halos. Judging by the size and the layout, it was a simple one-bedroom. Muted green houseplants rested on the sills. An ancient, smiling terrier snored on a cheap recliner. Curiously, the sofa was made up like a bed, with a comforter and pillow. Something clinked in the kitchen. I froze, then remembered no one could see me and went over to look. The breath went out of me. It was Jesse. Even in animated form, he looked puffy-eyed and miserable. with the tired, shuffling gait of a much older man. He ladled soup into a bowl, slammed a spoon into the broth, then covered his eyes and leaned against the counter. White curls of steam drifted lazily upward. Once he composed himself, he took the bowl to the bedroom. The rhythmic hiss of breathing apparatus filled the room. A single bed sat by the window. Jesse set the bowl on a side table and dragged a folding chair towards the bed. He stirred the soup. Brown broth teemed with bright vegetables. I tiptoed in and peered over his shoulder. A man, tall and broad once, badly withered now, lay in bed. Sparse, black hair lay around his sallow face like an anti-halo. Even in illness, his face was remarkable. In better health, this would have been a strikingly handsome man. Half-open eyelids revealed an ugly concave scar on the left and a single glassy iris on the right. That eye flicked toward Jesse, then towards me. He smiled. Cracked lips split and bled. "What?" Jesse asked brusquely. He tried to spoon broth into the old man's mouth, but it only dribbled out of his grin. I inched nervously to the foot of the bed. The man's eyes tracked me. Jesse noticed. "What are you looking at?" Suddenly, in the middle of this unremarkable painted dream, Earl Koenig's yellow eye flashed a hideous ember red. Something ghastly erupted from his skin. A deformed reptilian nightmare coated in half-luminescent weeping sores. It dragged itself out of its body and stretched, releasing a low, growling sigh. The old man released a low, chuffing laughter. "What are you doing?" Jesse looked around, clearly alarmed. "Who's there?" The monster crawled to the edge of the bed, growing with every step as the room changed. Furniture warped, casting twisted shadows along swiftly stretching walls. Frantic layers of red and orange light bloomed, turning the room into a nightmare. The monster grinned. Skin rolled up past its teeth, curling motions strangely hypnotic. The room's red light reflected off discolored fangs. I might have stood there, mesmerized forever, but it swiped me. My skin tore open, spattering gem-like droplets of blood across the carpet. Fiery pain exploded. I staggered backward, toward a door that was somehow much farther away than it should have been. The demon dropped to the floor, making the entire apartment quake. Saliva pooled between its teeth, dripping in long, glistening strings. "Will you listen?" Its deep snarl rumbled through my chest, making my bones hum. For an awful minute, I thought my rib cage would crack open. Jesse was panicking. "Will who listen? Where are you?" The old man laughed weakly as the demon grinned. I turned and ran. The doorway looked like a postage stamp. It might have been 1,000,000 miles away. Pain clawed up my insides and spread. I imagined black, weeping wounds spidering inside, splitting my organs into pieces. I lost my balance and fell as the demon approached, exuding blistering heat. My vision swam, throwing the room into further chaos. Jesse bolted. As he crossed the threshold, the door suddenly veered toward me. I grabbed the frame and pulled just as the demon wrapped a massive paw around my ankle. In the softly shadowed hall, a static figure flickered to life and charged. The monster released me in shock. I staggered to my feet and stumbled to the living room. Behind me, the demon rumbled with laughter. "There you are, Juliana. Why do—" He cut off, roaring in rage and pain. The glistening rope dangled from the hole, a full 3 feet over my head. I swiped for it weakly, missing by several inches. The floor shook under my feet. Warmth exploded from the hallway, intensifying quickly into painful heat. I jumped and swiped, catching the rope in one hand as the demon burst in wildly. He was too big for the entryway, and his bulk broke the walls. He reached up and swatted the static phantom off his face, slicing it open. It flew through the air, trailing a delirious burst of multicolored blood, of paint, and hit the opposite wall. I crawled up the rope because this was a dream, and when you are dreaming, you can do what you need to do, even when you are hurt. The tunnel continued to play Jesse's Technicolor horrors, hideously bright and maddeningly lovely. Below me, the monster's fiery eye peered into the tunnel. It pulled back, and for a moment I thought it was gone, that the tunnel would close and I would be safe. Then it punched upward, shattering the screen. It clawed its way after me, swiping all the while. I swung madly to avoid its massive claws. I don't know how I did it. Maybe because he's still weak, still effectively bedbound. But I made it to my apartment, to my gloriously normal, real-life apartment, and pulled the rope up. The beast snapped its teeth, jaws closing inches from my hand as the tunnel folded in on itself, leaving nothing but the carpet. I tapped the floor, quickly jerking my hand back. It felt too warm, but solid. I fell back. Rotted, burning pain pulsed through my body. I rolled over and saw a massive blood stain on the carpet. I looked down, panicking. My shirt was soaked with blood. I pulled it up to see. 3 deep, ragged wounds scored my stomach. Small blisters dotted the surrounding skin. Heavy pounding exploded through the room. I glanced feverishly around for the monster, but no. It was just the door. Someone was knocking at my door. It was Jesse, of course. He fell apart when he saw me, barely managing to guide me to the couch. "I told you not to do anything for me," he kept repeating. He called 911 and followed the ambulance to the hospital. I didn't wake until late this morning. He was in the waiting area. They wouldn't let him in my room because we aren't related, but relented when I asked. He's angry at me. Angry enough that I cried. That he cried. He wouldn't leave me, though. He wouldn't talk, but at least he stayed. I haven't seen my static phantom. Juliana, the demon called her. This terrifies me, because I need her more than I ever knew. She was a gatekeeper. Somehow. She gave me names and made sure dreams were focused, results-oriented, as it were. That isn't the case anymore. Last night I had painted dreams of everyone around me. Paramedics, nurses, doctors, blurry faces bustling through the hallway. An incredible array of pain and horror perversely portrayed through the most innocent of mediums. And no names, no starting point, no focus. The doctor discharged me this afternoon. Jesse took me to my apartment, ran home to get his dog, and came right back. They're sleeping on my couch right now. I know we're not done with this. Dreams aside, I still hurt. From my toes to the crown of my head, I feel like I'm burning. For another, the entire apartment, the air, the walls, even the floor, is too hot. When Jesse finally wakes, we'll talk. I hope there's something we can do. It'll probably be the last thing I do, but I need to get him away from Earl Koenig for good. I hope you guys enjoyed this part 4 of I found my old copy of my favorite childhood movie and something seriously wrong with it. We'll be continuing this next week. A video for this comes out every Wednesday. Be sure to also catch up with our podcasts on Mondays. And we do kind of like crazy vlog stuff on Fridays, or just do it yourself, or witch it yourself, as we like to say. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like. Subscribe if you haven't already. That would be amazing. And leave a comment if you'd like to see or hear me read anything else after we finish this 9-part series. Definitely comment down below with something that you'd like me to read or anything like that. Thanks. Have a good evening. Stay spooky.